All these thoughts are like, God, I've done all these things, and yet I find myself back at this place again. I didn't know how those kids were going to turn out. So I never judged the kids like by their appearance, the family they came from, or anything like that, because God had done that in my life. Like, he brought me from the gutters and what enabled me to live a good life. I want them to know that it doesn't matter what they were born into. It doesn't matter what they've gone through. It doesn't matter how far they've sinned or what's happened to them, whether they grew up rich or poor, whether they have an education or not, that if God calls you to do something, He'll give you the ability to do it.
Well, man, welcome to another episode of Rebuilding Life After Addiction. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. My name is Justin Franich. Excited to have you here today. Again, if you're new here, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel as we continue to provide inspiring content and inspiring stories to help you rediscover your purpose and find a life after addiction, because that's really what it's all about. And I'm excited about having my guest today, Pastor Matt Cross. Matt, how are you, man?
Doing good, brother. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Sorry, checking the audio real quick. I had too many instances where everything crashed after recording, didn't realize it until after talking for 45 minutes. Yeah. But man, I'm excited to connect and sit down and chat with you. And
same here, brother.
It's exciting. We're here at the Path Church, and man, so you've had a journey, right? You're associate pastor here at the church. Yep. You've worked as a CEO in the jails. Yep. You've been a sheriff. Yep. You ran for school board. You got attacked and called all sorts of names. I don't know if that's still happening or not. But
I'm still a bigot and racist.
Right, I hate when that happens. But before all of that, like, I've known you for a while, and I remember hearing some of your testimony, pieces of it throughout the year, and how the Lord got a hold of your life. Like, you had some addiction struggles in your life. And man, I'd love to just hear you kind of take us back to the beginning. Like how did Matt, end up a drug addict, dealing with this type of stuff before all of the cool stuff that you've got to do since?
Yeah. Thanks for that. I was just thinking here recently, Justin, how I can remember being like maybe 10, 11 years old. My parents were going through a divorce, and I remember driving down. I almost point you out on the Interstate 81 where we were driving. My family had moved from Stuart Straft and made the journey up here to Rockingham County, where my dad was working in the hospital. He used to fix the CT scanners that you go in if you get a CT scan. And I can just remember just thinking to myself, man, I really want to grow up and be someone that helps others. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know at 10, 11 years old what that meant, but I knew that there was a passion inside of me that I just wanted to help people. Yeah. And so that, it's just funny how I think about that, going back and seeing where God's brought my life and where the enemy tried to take me at a young age and through addiction, and to see what God has done through my life just by being not only faithful, because sometimes we're not faithful, but He's still faithful, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so it's nothing that I've done. I've earned any of this. It's been the grace of God that has helped me along the way and has kept me along the way. Yeah. And so I started doing drugs when I was like 12 years old, and I can remember that was the first time where I started smoking weed when I was 12. And it just, it led down from smoking cigarettes to getting drunk to getting high to the time when I graduated high school. Me and my buddies were going to up to Baltimore to buy cocaine. And that's at the end of me graduating high school was kind of, I was already burnt out. Some kids, they graduate, they go off to college, they get their partying stage out of them, man. I was full throttle from like sixth grade on. Yeah. Wow. And so when I came to faith in 1998 as a senior in high school, like I was searching for God. Yeah. And a lot of things happened leading up to that, but I started when I was 12.
So everybody talks about like addiction, right? And addiction is not really the root, but it's the fruit, right? There's something going on the inside. Yeah. And so 12 years old, 13 years old, starting to experience like Was it like a response to maybe any particular event? I know you mentioned your parents got divorced and whatnot, or was it modeled for you? I mean, influences in your life, like what kind of, what makes a 12-year-old start using drugs, right?
Yeah. I think mine was like out of curiosity at first. Like, first of all, like I was raised with this, for the most part, when I was sixth grade, my mom and dad got divorced. My mom stayed in Maine. Me and my three brothers, with my dad back to Virginia, and had a lot of free time on my hand, right? And so I was just hanging out, kicking it with my friends in high school, and just that was the part where that's where I think I didn't have that structure, and I had that freedom to kind of go. And the drugs, I think, led into more like just kind of more a lot of fear working in my mind and things like that.
Yeah.
To where I think that fear inside my life was being masked by the addiction as well, like, getting high to just fit in, to also to mask some of the pain, that I went through just a child of growing up and your parents going through a divorce, and the things you hear, the things you see, and then add to that, having all that free time with no structure in my life. Like I looked at my kids now, like me being a dad, and I still don't have it all together, right? But I looked at my kids and like, man, you've got it so much better than what I had.
They don't even believe that, though, do they?
No, they don't. They don't believe it at all. They don't even know. But I've taken my kids on missions trips out of the country. My dad couldn't afford that when I was a kid, right?
Yeah,
and so my kids at 13, 14 years old, they've been able to experience third world countries.
Yeah.
And man, I lived in poverty though, right? Like my dad was struggling to pay the bills. He would umpire baseball games just to feed us at nighttime some nights. And so, we grew up with struggling, so I think
it's a lot of admiration there for your dad, I'm sure. Yeah, man.
Love that guy.
Yeah.
Good guy. And my mom and dad are some of the best people. They struggled a lot. My mom grew up basically as an orphan, and was brought in, and she had a hard life growing up. And so I have a lot of respect for my mom. But
I mean, that's uncommon too, though. I mean, you're thinking about hearing the story, like you don't hear all three kids going with dad too often.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for your dad to fight through that, I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah. It was four of us.
Yeah.
It was four of us that decided to go back with dad. We had moved to Maine, and dad said, where y'all want to head to? And we said, let's go back to Rockingham. And it was all about sports at the time, for us, because we were playing baseball and basketball. But that was about 12 years old when I started doing drugs, and it just led me down it led me down a bad path.
Yeah. So let's fast forward then. So you said you mentioned earlier that by the time you hit 18, 19, like you're just done. Yeah. You just burnt yourself out. Like, right, a lot of people do run that race for years and never get free. Was there a turning point anywhere in there that, you kind of got to this point after, that's a 6-year period, right?
Yeah.
And starting at 12, it's significant. I mean, that's a formative years of our lives, and influenced by different substances and whatnot. Yep. So what was the turning point that kind of started to shift your life?
Well, the turning point, man, was one evening. It was dark time. I was riding my bicycle down the road to my older brother's house. He lived down the road in an apartment, and I heard a voice, which I believe was just the voice of Satan, the voice of the enemy, say, "I got you now." And when I heard that, like that fear, like just was like, it struck me. It struck me like to my core, and it really led me like on. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I'd experienced my first panic attack, and that I knew what it was, like a panic. I didn't know what it was till later on in life, where I had another panic attack later on in my early 30s. And that panic attack led me just into like anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of worry, things like that. And that was my turning point. Like I began to I seek God at that time. I remember my dad took us to a Christian church when I was younger, and I started reading the Bible, and it was King James Bible, but my dad had a lot of these verses highlighted in the Bible, and I didn't understand it when I read it. Like my favorite verse when I came to faith was Matthew 11:28-30. It's the verse where Christ says, "Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest."
Yeah, that's good.
Take up my yoke, learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You shall find rest for your soul. And when I heard that word yoke, Justin, like the only yoke I knew was egg yolk. I wasn't a country boy, right? I grew up in rural Virginia, but I wasn't a country boy. And so I'm like, the Bible like was foreign to me.
Jesus, gonna smack me in the face with an egg.
Like, what do you mean yoke? Like I didn't understand it, but one thing I understood was that when I read the word, there was peace that followed. And so even though I'm sitting down reading this book that I don't understand, it's given me peace as I read it. And so I started going to this church this guy had asked my dad to come to, and it was an old time Pentecostal holiness church that they brought me to. And that's where I heard for the first time an old lady speaking in tongues. And like my dad was a good Baptist guy, right? So
could you set the stage for just a second for Pentecostal holiness, right? For the audience who may not understand or have the what does that mean, right? Pentecostal.
Right.
So set the scene in a typical Sunday morning Pentecostal holiness church for those who have no clue.
So I walk into the church, baggy jeans. I look like Bob Marley. I tell people all the time. And I washed my hair, but I didn't wash it too well, and so I had knots in the back of my hair, and I was just like a hippie kid growing up. And so I walk into this church, and the pastor that Sunday night or Wednesday night, I forget which one it was, he preached on men having long hair. Well, I'm the only man in there or a young guy sitting there with long hair.
Do you think he changed the message when he saw you walk in?
Yeah, I think he was inspired as soon as he saw me, And so, the women wear real long dresses, no makeup, hair usually up in a bun, all the men with suit and ties. Nothing wrong with that, but it was just, here I am coming off, kind of the streetwise, not like gangster street, but I'm coming out of addiction, coming out of, like I told you, 12 years old. I just started going hard, and I walk into that church, and I can remember it had a brick background in the church, and I remember like seeing a vision of Jesus's face, and he was smiling at me. And I thought to myself, it's like, God, how could you be smiling at me?
Yeah.
In this moment of anxiety and fear and stuff I'm going through. But I can remember seeing the face of Jesus smiling at me at that time. And I went forward to the altar one night, and man, no one came and laid hands on me. No one came and did anything. It was just me at the altar saying, God, if you can use me, use me. Yeah. And that's where my journey began as a 12th grader in high school. I can remember not long after that, Justin, that I was walking down the hallway, and this assistant administrator was there who never had one conversation with me, didn't know me, but I looked rough, I long hair, baggy jeans. I was just I'm sure they knew, I was the kid using drugs and drinking and things like that. And he came up to me and he said, I've seen kids like you, and I know how they turn out. And that's the only thing he said to me. And I was like, well, I knew he wasn't telling me like I'm going to Harvard. Right. I'm going to some Ivy League school. Things are going to be great. He was telling me, I've seen kids like you, and they end up in jail, in prison, in the grave. And the only thing I knew to say is I looked at him, I said, okay. Yeah. And I walked away. But one thing he didn't know at that time was that I had given my life to Christ. And even though I looked the same on the outside, there was something happening on the inside.
Yeah, that's so good.
That was taking root inside my life. Yeah. And so when I walked back into that school a decade later as a school resource officer.
Yeah, wow.
That's why I say God's got a sense of humor, right?
Yeah.
I was the last person to succeed out of my class, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I was the last person that anyone ever believed would ever go into law enforcement.
Right.
And the sheriff of Rockingham looked at me and said, I see your background, what you've shared, your drugs and things like that. But he said, I truly believe you're a changed man. Yeah. And he said, I'm going to give you an opportunity. And that's when he started me out in the jail. And I just kind of went from there. And I'm on for a 12-year journey in a law enforcement career. So
how did that process play out? Like going from being in the school, having this negative words spoken, you're never going to make it. You're a failure. And I think like a lot of people feel that, right? Yeah. I think some of the questions that are being asked by those trying to get out, like, man, am I irredeemable?
Right.
And so you're talking about already dealing with the anxiety and all those internal struggles.
Yeah.
And then somebody that's supposed to be speaking life into your future confirms all the anxiety that you're feeling already. I mean, you got the world against you already. You got some difficult situations at home, fighting through these addiction battles. And so you said Jesus was doing something on the inside of you.
Right.
But how did that begin to materialize, right? There's a lot of question about how do I find God's will?
Yeah.
How do I find the purpose of God for my life? And like, I'm assuming resource officer was nowhere on the list.
No.
Yeah. So how do you get from in that hallway having those negative words spoken to you to 10 years later coming back and I'm here as a school resource officer? Like that's wild, right?
Yeah. It's funny, but what I did? I threw myself at God. I threw myself at God. I was sitting, I could take it to the porch. I was sitting on in McGackey'sville that my dad rented this house from, and I grew up in my freshman year through my senior year till I moved out of the house. And I was reading the Bible, and I'm like, God, I'm hearing and seeing what Jesus can do in someone's life. He heals the sick. He raises the dead. He casts out demons. He gives us a new life when we come to Christ. And I remember sitting there on that patio and saying, God, if you're alive, then I want to know you that are the same person today than what you are when I read this book.
Yeah, wow.
And when I said that, it's the same actual prayer that Paul prays in Philippians when he says, "Oh, that I may know you, and in the power of your resurrection."
Yeah.
Paul's this internal thing is crying out, saying, "Oh God, that I may know you." That's what I was saying. God, I want to know that you're the same God in the Bible that I read about,
for sure.
And then I want to know that you still have power to heal the sick, cast out demons, and to do miracles in people's lives. Yeah. If you're that God, I'll serve you.
Yeah,
and that's what I did. I threw myself at God, man. I found a church. It happened to be here at Path Church, and me and my buddy Bobby Bergdahl, who came along the journey close at the same time. And we said, hey, we're going to church this weekend. And we were driving down South Main Street in the Harrisonburg, and we saw this sign that said, "Come worship Jesus with us." And we were like, hey, let's go there this Sunday and check it out, right? Yeah. And so we went in.
You've already been to the Pentecostal Holiness Church, so it can't get much.
So we went to the the storefront old steakhouse, church. It's been torn down since, but I get out of the car. There's this beautiful blonde hair lady with a short mini skirt on. I look over at Bobby. I'm like, man, we found the right church.
Right. Yes. Okay. Amen.
Here's my cardinal self, right? But I walk inside this church, and I see this picture of this girl on the wall, and I remembered who she was, and I look in there and I see her dad, and it was Dan Garber, and I remember Dan from the baseball field and being a coach in Elkton, and that was the first time like I felt the presence of God when Pastor Renee began to lead in worship.
Yeah,
I tell a story that I just lost myself in worship, and I was dancing.
You keep talking.
And I'm sitting there dancing, and with my eyes shut, and about knock over the drums. And so it's just that was the first time I came into the presence of God so thick. It's when I started attending Path Church, and I said, God, I want this. Like I want to know you. So what led me out of the addiction, what led me out of the lies, what led me out of the fear, the anxiety, the panic attacks, all these things was throwing myself at God and saying, God, if you're real and you can use anyone, here I am.
Yeah.
And that's literally, Justin, that's like what I did. Like I quit the job I was working at. I was working at Coors when I graduated, making really good money. And my dad was like, "Don't you quit that job."
Benefits and everything. Yeah.
But it was working, I was working 12-hour shifts. I couldn't attend church, but like every other weekend. And I was like, no, God, like I need to be in the presence of God. I need to be around the body of Christ. And I knew I needed that in my life. So I threw myself at God, and it was God that brought me out of that dark place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good, man. And I think that community piece is so vital.
Oh, it's huge.
Like it is like I tell people all the time, it's the difference between success or failure. We use recovery terms and all of that, and I use them a lot of times for dexterity because the community understands them, right? But like it is New Testament church, right? Like how do I break addiction? Like it's laid out in the book of Acts,
right?
It's laid out in the New Testament.
Right.
Like it's not complicated, but it's difficult to do, right? And you got to really throw yourself at the purposes of God. So I want to fast forward then to former drug addict working as a CO.
Yeah.
And because I know the dynamics, right, that exist between people that have been in the drug addicted lifestyle and police officers. And man, I'll never forget. I had come out of Teen Challenge, and I've told this story a few times, and it cracks me up even to this day. I had a car full of Teen Challenge students driving through Newmarket, and I get pulled over, right? And homeboy rolls up to the car, and I'm respectful as all get out. I'm still new in the faith, so I'm still nervous around cops.
Oh yeah,
But he rolls up to the car, and they don't do this anymore. I think laws have changed, but I smell marijuana. And I'm like, there's no way. You don't smell anything. And it just cracked me up. But I got a car full of TC guys. Yeah. These guys have been clean maybe 2 days. Yeah. And so they're freaking out. And he's like, I got probable cause. I want to search the vehicle. Can I search your vehicle?
Wow.
I'm like, you know what, man? Have at it. Go ahead. Knock yourself out.
It is a good feeling.
And so, but it just cracks me up, that dynamic, because I'm nervous, they're nervous. And so you kind of bridge that gap. Yeah. And then you end up on the other side of the authority.
Yeah.
Right. And just.
It felt weird for a while.
Yeah.
God, it wasn't like, I came out of addiction, came out of that, and then boom, right into, being a sheriff. I think there was probably almost a decade, between that. Like I think I began in law enforcement when I was 27. So it was almost a decade of me changing. Like I remember that first time I got pulled over after all coming out of addiction and coming out of doing drugs and everything else. Like when I got pulled over, like I was cool with the cop. I was like, I saw the blue lights. I didn't freak out. Like, should I run or what should I do? And so that's a good feeling when you finally come out and like you get pulled over by a cop. You're like, hey, man, the worst thing can happen today is just get a ticket. That's right.
I didn't do it. Put my hands on my head. So let me ask you about that relationship with authority, though, because it is tumultuous, right, for those in addiction.
Right.
And how important would you say it is to get that mindset shifted for those struggling with addiction? Because I know people even 10, 15, 20 years later, they still struggle with that dynamic with law enforcement. Right. And they have these trust issues and all of that stuff. And and of course we live in a culture today that doesn't make it easier. Yeah. Like we're being told all the time. Yeah. So how important is that dynamic for somebody,
Yeah. I Justin, the one thing that stood out with me when I went into law enforcement was when I was sitting in the police academy and they said, what was the number one reason why you wanted to get into this profession? And 98% of the people in that classroom said because they wanted to help people. And I think for a majority, police officers, that's what they want to do. Yeah, they do want to help people. But in every profession, you have bad apples. Right. Believe me, even teachers, some of them not good people. Right. Working in law enforcement, I know. But that doesn't put a bad, we know teachers are good, right? Right. And so I think that law enforcement as a whole, they want to help people. And sometimes the best help that someone can get is to go to jail.
Yeah.
Because that gets them away from the addiction. It helps them get out of the place where they're at, and maybe a fresh start for them, maybe.
Yeah.
But that's maybe you can look at, people can begin to look at law enforcement as, they're there to help too. I know some of them are arrogant, they're jerks, things like that, right? We talked about a second ago. Yeah. But that's not all of them.
Right.
There are a lot of them are there to do want to help and see you get free and not have to come arrest you. Right.
It took me a few years, but after we pulled away from that car, I told the guys, I said, you got to understand this dude. He rolls up. All you guys look like you're up to something.
Yeah.
Like all of us do. You know? Yeah. And so, I told the guys that day, I said, we just taught a lesson. When you're doing right, you ain't got nothing to worry about. Yeah. And it is what it is. I'm not going to make their life more difficult. You mentioned that thread though of helping others.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned that earlier on in the story.
Yeah.
You heard God say that to you.
Yeah.
Way back in the day.
Yeah.
And throughout your life, that after getting free, that's kind of been the drive. Quit my job, all in on the kingdom.
Yeah.
Sheriff's office, helping others, and then other pursuits after that. And has there been relapses over the years and that type of pursuit? Would you say that it contributed toward it, or you know what I'm saying?
Right. No, I've had zero relapses of going back to drugs, right? Zero relapses, even with alcohol, of wanting to be drunk or being drunk. Zero. Yeah. I remember I woke up one day in my own throw up from just a very bad party the night before, and my brother wakes me up around 11 o'clock next morning. It's like, Matt, we got to get out of here. Yeah. And I got throw up just dried to me. And I was still in the process then, like when I got saved. It wasn't like I got saved and then all of a sudden, boom, I'm free from all the drugs and alcohol and fear and things like that. It was a process that God took me through, right? And trusting Him and walking with Him. And so I haven't had relapses with any of the drugs or addiction. I will say this, I said earlier, I was in my 30s and I had a second panic attack. And I don't know if people have experienced, I know some people have experienced those panic attacks. And man, that sent me back remembering of what I came out of back when I was 19 years old. Yeah. And it was 4 years, Justin, of going through my faith, everything seemed like it was being shaken at the time. And I did a lot of research on this and a lot of studying, but a lot of old preachers would say that it was a dark season of the soul. And I went through a season like that in 2016, and I'm a cop, right? And I'm in this position to help others, and I'm a pastor. I'm going on mission trips. I'm preaching in the pulpit. I'm serving the Lord. But internally, man, my faith was being shaken.
Yeah.
And the fear, the anxiety, all that stuff was real. And I can remember laying in my bed one night with my wife, and she just was holding on to me and praying over me. And we got a saying that Kim Clement used to say, I see you in the future, and you look a lot better than you do right now. Right. And she just would prophesy that over me. And I remember her saying, do you want to go to see a counselor or something like that? And I'm telling her, listen, if I go to a counselor as a cop and I tell them the things I'm dealing with, they're probably going to say I don't have a job. Right. Yeah. So here I am. I'm a dad. I'm a pastor. I'm in law enforcement, and I'm dealing with these things, and I feel like God is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, wow.
And it was a dark season of the soul for me, but God again brought me out of that dark place in my life.
Yeah.
And showed me that His goodness is greater than any darkness that can ever come.
Yeah.
And so, no, I never had a relapse back to drugs, and I didn't even turn to drugs during that time.
Right.
I knew my only hope was Christ.
Yeah.
And so I remember being out mowing serving, mowing the grass out here at the church, and I'm just weeping and crying, and remembering that verse in Job. It says, "Although the Lord may slay me, yet will I trust in Him."
Yeah, that's
and I said, God, even if I die in this situation, I felt like He had abandoned me. That old oh shoot, it's an old song, Christian song. It says, sometimes I feel you closer than my skin, and other times I don't feel you at all. That's the kind of season I was going through. I had felt God as close as my skin, right? Like breathing on me.
Yeah, wow.
And then I felt like, God, where are you at?
Yeah.
And during that season of testing, during that season of going through that in my life, it took a lot of prayer. It took a lot of just seeking the Lord, and it took a lot of me being honest with my wife, with my pastor, and just allowing them to help walk me through that time in my life.
Yeah, that's really good. I asked about that, and it's such a good story. And I mean, so to get up to that point where, I mean, a lot of turning back to our old vices is chosen in moments like that.
Right.
We want to escape the anxiety. We want to escape the dark night, the pain that we're going through. Let me numb this so I'm not feeling it. And I'm curious on the buildup, because I think you said earlier that it wasn't an instant moment at the altar.
Right.
I had some struggles early on. I was Jesus was working this thing out of me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people end up maybe in those moments and misinterpret that this thing's working. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
And so what did those, put it, I guess the best way to call it workout, I don't work out much, everybody can tell that, but putting the reps in, right?
Yeah.
To be able to get to your 30s.
Yeah.
And not burn your entire life down around you.
Right.
Because you're feeling something that you felt at 18. Because I can imagine mentally, what's the point of all this?
Yeah.
I'm in the enemy would say I'm in the exact same spot I was when I came out of addiction.
Yeah, God's not real.
Right.
You're in that same place. This is a figment of your imagination. All these thoughts, where's your God at now? And can you really be saved? Can you really be helped? Can you really be delivered? Right. All these thoughts are like, God, I've done all these things, and yet I find myself back at this place again, and it was just God really bringing me through that, saying, listen, I got you here, even in the midst of all that. So I think one of the things that I look back to in that time is trusting the Lord in that moment, that He was going to get me out of that, you know, and because I had put in the reps, because I had put in the moments with God, and knowing that, man, you're faithful. I love you. I don't do this because I want to get paid, or I don't do this because I'm trying to earn my salvation. But if you're still real, you'll get me through this too. Yeah. And that. Dude, that was tough. Yeah. That was tough, but there was a determination in me still in my 30s that said, God didn't bring me this far to drop me now. Right. And it's the Exodus story all over again in our lives. And, theologically speaking, we all can kind of look at the Exodus story and find our place in that story, right? Yeah. And that's where I was at. God had brought me out into the desert, and I thought He brought me out there to kill me. Right. But He had a promised land if I would trust Him. Yeah. And so I had to face the giants. I had to face all those those fears and anxieties and the lies of the enemy, and say, so what? Right. What you got? Yeah. So what? So what? So good, So that was my anchor throughout that time. And not a lot of people, I don't share that a lot. I do from the pulpit and things like that, but that was part of my testimony, because I don't see my testimony just when God brought me out, but I'm still a living testimony now. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, the testimony is growing. I mean, and So you mentioned your wife and Pastor Donnell being such a strong voice, right, during that season. And so family, right? So you weren't married while an addict. You didn't have kids while an addict. You came out on the other side of that.
Yeah.
So
My kids have never known that part of my life.
They've never known you as that. So, but do they know the story? Little bits
They
of it?
know little bits.
Okay.
Because as a father, I've not wanted to glamorize any of the stuff that I did.
Right.
Like, especially when they're a young age. Like, I'll tell them more as they get older. Like, I tell my oldest one some things now, and he's like, "Dad, you did what?"
Right.
But I remember hearing stories of my dad, of him smoking weed and doing things. And in some ways, it kind of glamorized that. And to when I became a teenager, I was like, well, I'm going to have my own story. I'm going to try it myself.
Yeah.
And although he wasn't trying to do that, I just saw a pitfall there as a parent. Like, hey, I think every generation should be better, right?
Right.
Like, I want my kids to be better than me, and so I knew that was a pitfall, like not to glamorize my past with them.
Yeah. So I think about ask you a question about parenting and all that for a second, because I think about. So my parents did the best they could, right? And as all of our parents do. And of course, they didn't know what they didn't know. But when I was growing up, I had a desktop computer in my bedroom, 56K internet, unfettered access to Napster and porn.
Yeah.
And so my proclivity to fall into that addiction, right, when I was a teenager, now I'm hyper aware as a parent. Like with my kids' phones and my oldest just got her phone like a year ago. She's 14, 15. We homeschool, so we told him, like, what do you need it for? Everybody going to call us in the house. Who are you calling? But they know. And like, I'll grab the phone, like, I'm checking your device. Yeah. I'm holding you accountable.
Yeah.
And so my experience as a teenager falling into addiction has greatly impacted the way that I father, and the way that I parent. And so I'd just be curious what maybe of your past and what you've been through has impacted the way that you parent your kids today.
Yeah. I was sitting here thinking when you were saying that, I'm a little bit older than you, and the internet didn't get popular until like I was out of school, like so 98, like right. I graduated in 1998. So I'm, dial up, internet, AOL, right. all those.
You've got
instant messaging. Like that was all right when I graduated. Right. Yeah. And so I didn't have to deal with pornography in that sense. Like mine was, I always tell people all the time, like I had to be brave enough to go up to the 7-Eleven counter with the old lady working behind it and has a smoker cough and ask her for the Hustler magazine behind the counter.
We need to bring that kind of shame back, because like it would make it less like
it was right.
Yeah,
right.
That's healthy.
Yeah, it was though. Like go looking it up on your phone, like sitting in your bedroom, like our kids now we talked about, right?
Yeah.
And so, mine. So I had to, like, my wife's really good at that. Like she's the lockdown queen of our kids' phones. Like, I mean, and even as a Christian parent raising kids, we find ourselves that like even you could put all the stuff on it and do everything you do. If you put your guard down, the enemy is going to be there to make sure your kids get caught up in that pornography and all kinds of stuff. So it's so important for parents these days to have a lockdown on all their devices and not just think, well, we're doing all we can do. We're going to church, they're good kids, and they are good kids.
Right.
But temptation is temptation.
Yeah.
And so if you would have gave me as a teenage boy like access to just like the VHS pornography tapes, I would have been watching them, right? And so it's the same way when we give them access with these telephones, like they have access to all that. So
my parents, God bless them, they didn't know.
Yeah,
nobody knew. It was all brand new at that point, and I was left up there with a lot of time,
right?
And took about 4.5 minutes to download a picture, which kind of killed the buzz of the whole thing. You're sitting there waiting, catching a little piece of it at a time, but like, it is what it is. Yeah. I mean that's. It's funny. Yeah. So kind of transitioning from that, man, to, parenting, fathering, and whatnot, to like recent years, like deciding to take on the easy task of running for school board as a conservative, like Yeah, why?
Yeah. You told me, we were on a phone conversation a couple of weeks ago. You were like, you must be a glutton for for just a beating. You're a pastor, then you wanted to jump into the political realm of school board, and I did it. I had thought about running for school board a couple of years before I actually did, and safety had always been my big concern, and it still is. You see all these school shootings that are happening throughout the nation, and I got into law enforcement because I wanted to be a school resource officer. I wanted to protect the kids. I wanted to be that good example. Like, what was good for the poor kid was good for the rich kid. When I was a law enforcement officer, I played hacky sack with the hippies, and I talked with the jocks. I mean, it was, I didn't judge the rich or the poor. They were going to be the same because I had been judged.
Right.
I didn't know how those kids were going to turn out. So I never judged the kids by their appearance, the family they came from, or anything like that, because God had done that in my life. He brought me from the gutters and what enabled me to live a good life.
Yeah.
And so you never know as a teenager, where God's going to bring one of these kids, right? So anyway, I had this passion for public safety. And I'm one of the school board members when I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh all the time. I don't know if you ever listened to him. So, Rush Limbaugh for 20 years, I listened to him, and he made me laugh. He made me cry. There were so many things that I loved about Rush Limbaugh. And when he passed away, one of our school board members called him an evil piece of infection. And when I heard him say that, it just went through me. And I remember when Rush died, I came home that night. My wife was fixing supper. She asked me to go outside and get some groceries out of the car. I went out there, and I'm thinking about Rush, and I'm crying when I'm coming back in. And I tell my wife, I'm like, is it weird for a grown man who never met another man to be crying over his death? And I thought to myself, I was like, no, I met Rush. He made me laugh 3 hours a day. He made me think. Yeah. And at times I did cry when I listened to him. And so when I heard that school board member say that, I was like, I'm going to a school board meeting. And so that was my first, jumping right into it. And then, we had 2020 with all the masking and with all the stuff that we were seeing through CRT, and people can say what they want to. There are people out there wanting to push that agenda onto our kids. And I just became very aware of what was happening. And I was like, I got to do something.
Yeah.
And that's what really thrusted me into this public life of wanting to be a school board member. And it's not glamorous at all, but it's been a calling that God called me to do.
And you hear the thread through your whole story, right?
Yeah.
I want to help others.
Yeah.
And that drive, right? Yeah. And I think so often, I told somebody yesterday, I was talking about this, addiction, regardless of what root is causing it, becomes a very selfish behavior. It's I need to numb. I don't want to feel. I'm going to get the next time. I mean, there are so many ways that you can crack this thing. And one of the things that I've always been fascinated by is how, the antidote to selfishness is selflessness. Right. Right. They're opposites of one another.
Right.
And I think that if people can kind of get a hold of this, you're hearing the thread. I'm okay, God, I'm throwing myself all into your purposes. Yep. And if that takes me to the jail, takes me to the jail, takes me on the road, writing traffic tickets, I'm going to do that. Yeah. I'm associate pastor, I'm going to do that. Yeah. And now the school board, which is you better hear from God. Because politics are so polarized now. Yeah. A local school board race, or being passionate about family values, or, wanting to call a man and a woman, right? It's controversial. Yeah. And these are the things that we're when we're in the middle of all this, trying to raise our children too, and it is interesting. I'm serving, and I'm trying to be that voice, even the one story, oh, you're the guy that's never going to make it. Yeah. I'm going to try to be that voice. So no other kid has to hear that. Yeah. And so if there's any one thing, and I know this is probably a loaded question, but if there's any one thing that you hope to kind of teach others, like through your different leadership roles, like is there a recurring theme, recurring thread, in that you really want, if this is the message, I want people to get from Matt Cross.
Yeah.
What is that?
I want people to know this one thing about me, and that's 2 Corinthians 5:17, that if any man or woman be in Christ, they're made a new creature.
Yeah.
That the old things pass away, and behold, all things become new. That's what I want them to know. I want them to know that it doesn't matter what they were born into. It doesn't matter what they've gone through. It doesn't matter how far they've sinned or what's happened to them, whether they grew up rich or poor, whether they have an education or not, that if God calls you to do something, he'll give you the ability to do it.
Yeah.
And that's really my message that I hope people see from me. Here I am sitting on a educational board. I have an associate degree in biblical studies. I didn't go off to college. I don't have a bachelor degree or anything like that, right? Yeah. But I'm the chairman of the board now of a place, over 11,000 kids, over 2,000 employees, and I'm sitting here as the chairman on this board where I was looked to when I was a teenager for one of the administrators that said, "I've seen kids like you, and I know how they turn out."
Yeah.
And whether I don't put no judgment on that guy for saying that, but he couldn't see what God saw in me.
Yeah.
And that's really what I want people to see. Is like, you don't have no idea like what God wants to do in your life.
Yeah.
And when I look back to 19-year-old Matt Cross, if you would have told me that I would have became a police officer, I would have laughed, number one. If you would have told me I would have gotten married and been married now for going on 25 years, I would have laughed.
Right.
And if you told me I became a father of 3, I would have been like, no way.
Yeah.
Like, because the only thing I ever saw good in my life was destruction. And that's really what I saw before I met Christ. And that's why I was like, God, if anyone can save me, it has to be you. And I don't want to be like these other Christians that I saw in my past that like were living a double life.
Yeah.
That's why I threw myself at God, and I was like, God, if I'm going to do this, like, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, that's so good.
And so it was easy for me to, like, I say easy, but it was easy for me to walk away from, the meth, the coke, the alcohol. Like I was an alcoholic, man, before I graduated. I was an alcoholic. But I started smoking cigarettes when I was 12. And that was the hardest thing for me to quit, was the tobacco and smoking. And I remember being at church service on a Wednesday night, and I remember Jesus walking me through, like, hey, the cigarettes aren't going to take you to hell, but you're going to smell like it before you get there,
right.
or you're going to smell like hell as you walk on earth. Right. And so I remember, I was like, God, I want to quit this. I'd wrinkle them up. I'd throw them away. I'd get them back out because I couldn't afford another pack at a time, and put them back together.
Yeah. That's funny.
And so I remember Wednesday night service, I was at church, and Pastor Dan said, I think I believe there are people here that want to quit smoking tonight. God wants to set you free. Well, that was me. There was me and another lady that came down, and he laid his hands on me that night and prayed. And I have not smoked a cigarette since. Mm-hmm. That was it. That's what it took. It took me being in the presence of God, giving God my yes, and saying, God, here I am. I tried, I failed, I tried, I failed, and I just kept coming.
Yeah.
And I kept pursuing him, and eventually he took it from me.
Yeah.
And so, like, I tell people all the time, like, I smell cigarette smoke once in a while, and man, it smells good sometimes, right?
Right, yeah.
Sometimes it smells awful, but
I
sometimes
couldn't imagine the buzz I'd get from smoking a cigarette at this point in my life. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But I think about, like, God delivered me from that.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to go back to it.
So Matt, I'm 19. I'm in the middle of an addiction. I maybe don't have any positive voices speaking into my life. Kind of feel stuck, isolated. Nobody really understands what I'm going through or really cares about my future. What do you say to me to help me get started?
Yeah.
Like, what do you speak into that type of situation?
I'd speak into your life and say you have no idea, like the seed that God has inside your life. And if you allow God to water that seed through his Holy Spirit, if you'll surrender yourself to him, like it's not going to be easy. Like I tell people all the time, like walking with Christ, he calls us to be soldiers. And so I'm not going to tell you that's going to be easy. I'm not going to give you, a little speech talk. Like, you're going to be okay. You're going to go through some rough times.
Yeah.
You're going to have to make some hard decisions. You're going to have to grow up and be the big boy or big girl now and say, you know what? I got to take care of me before I can help anyone else.
Yeah.
And so I've got to throw. I would encourage, like I said earlier, throw yourself on God. Yeah. Like if you will throw yourself on God, like I preached this past weekend on Jacob and Esau, and that story where Jacob, like his name means trickery, right? Right. He could trick himself. He could talk himself out of different areas and into different situations. He could talk himself out of those things. But in the time when he's like, man, I need God, he threw himself on God. Yeah. And he wrestled with God, the Bible says, and God's like, hey, let me go. And he's like, I'm not letting you go until you bless me. Yeah. Like if you will do that, if you'll throw yourself on God and be like, God, I'm not letting you go until you bless me. Yeah. That's so good. You have no idea the heights and even depths that Christ will take you if you'll trust him. Yeah. And so that would be my like speech to a 19-year-old, even to 20-year-old and 30-year-old, be like, bro, like now's the time. If you'll throw yourself on God, just the Bible says, test me. Yeah. And I think that a lot of times we don't test him. We don't have that cry like the Apostle Paul. It says, oh, that I may know you. You got to hear like that groaning inside Paul, like, oh, that I may know you and in the power of your resurrection, right? And so if you, the rest of that verse is, and that I may also suffer with you, right? Yeah. And so we can't leave out that part, because when you serve the Lord truly, he calls us to pick up the cross at all cost. And if that means suffering with him, that's what we do. Yeah. And so but the life of suffering that you'll serve with Christ will be 1,000 times better than you being selfish and serving yourself. Yeah, man. I think the suffering that I went through as an addict prepared me. Yeah. Like, because I did the meth thing, the detox, and up and down, needles, all that jazz. I mean, that was my life story and that history, man. But like, I mean, we've been through some hard times. I've had some experiences similar to what you talk about, the anxiety and panic attacks and all that. But it's just like, I've always been intentional about remembering how bad it was back then. Yeah, yeah. And it's always a frame of reference. Yeah. And so I think that like the people like you're already suffering. Yeah. If you're trapped in this addiction, and so there's only upside. Yeah. And it's so good, man. I appreciate you opening up and sharing, and you're welcome. Just as we wrap up, so how can somebody either connect with you, with Path Church? I know you've got some various social media stuff out there and whatnot, man. But how can somebody connect with you? Yeah, and easily if you friend me on Facebook, Matt Cross, or if you go to our church Facebook page at Path Church, Harrisonburg, Virginia, you'll be able to connect with us there. Sunday mornings, we're here service at 10 a.m. and we also have a small gathering on Wednesday nights, the Bible study. It's really good, man. I sat there, Justin, last night, and talked with a circle of 20, 25 people of what we were thankful for, and to hear so many people that I've served the Lord with over the last 24 years of my life talk about how, like, I'm thankful for this body, like we're family. Yeah, and that's good. And to hear that and to be a part of that, it was like, man, it's really cool, because if I wouldn't lay down my life and be a servant, like I would have never had the opportunity to connect with other people that I never would have connected with before.
Yeah.
And I think that's what God uses the church to do, is to connect you with people that you would have never ran with before. Like he gets you out of your own little cliques.
So true.
And he's like, hey, you're going to serve this old lady. You're gonna serve. You're gonna serve over here in Central America, where you don't even know their language, and you're gonna do all the. You're gonna sit on a school board where you don't even have the education.
That's incredible.
I mean, it's just all these things that God takes the foolish things of the world to confound the wise.
Yeah, that's so good.
I've lived that and walked through it. But anyway, you could connect with me on any of those levels. Reach out, inbox me, But I'd love to get to know you and be able to walk with Christ with you.
Yeah, amen.
So
do they have any plans locally of allowing our homeschool kids to participate in sports yet, or at least giving me my tax dollars back in the meantime?
Oh man, you're wanting to bury me right now with that question.
I'm just messing with you.
They already called me a disruptor. They think that I want to come in and tear down the public education system. Yeah. But I am 100% for tax dollars following your kids, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the best thing that we can do. Like your choice with your kid on what you believe is their best educational path.
Yeah.
That's where your tax dollars should be going.
That's a big conversation right now. We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens
Whether
there.
the Department of Education even exists anymore,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. I probably shouldn't have said that out loud, but yeah, man. Well, I appreciate it. And thanks, man. It's so good to sit down and chat. And even we've known each other for a long time, to hear pieces of your story that I haven't heard before. And it's awesome. I appreciate you opening up. And, a lot of people, I think, run from their recovery journey, their backstory. It's like, and I understand the why behind it, but like, I think that, man, more people sharing, like, it just encourages folks to know they're not alone in this journey. And then like, man, there's life on the other side of this.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's been the drive.
I think that's true too. And when we're as Christians, when we don't allow ourselves to open up and show our vulnerability and even share a path that people only see, like, they only see the good things. Like they see the Matt Cross in the pulpit, right? They see the guy up there preaching with the anointing on him. They see the Pastor Justin that's preaching on Sunday morning that's strong and full of the word and everything
Very
else.
ADHD all over the place, but yeah.
They see the glamour side of it, right? They see the good side.
Pastor Dan taught me how to chase squirrels, and I've been chasing them ever since, buddy. So, yeah, man.
But they see the good things in our life, but a lot of times, if you don't open up and be like, nah, I've got these scars, man.
Yeah.
This is who I am. And, even today, like if I allow myself, if I don't pursue after God, man, there's that flesh side of me that will get out of control.
Yeah.
And I've got to continually to crucify that flesh and say, God, I want to, now I'm at the point, I'm at least 25, 26, 27 years into serving the Lord. And now I'm on this halfway point of saying, God, now I want to finish it.
Yeah.
Like now, like I want to intentionally serve you and seek you and be very intentional, because I don't know how many days I have left.
Right.
But I want to finish what you began, and I don't want to fall. I don't want to become a castaway, as Paul said. Like after I've done all these things, after I've been through all this stuff, like I don't want to be for nothing. Now I want to finish well.
Yeah.
And so, no, I appreciate you, Pastor, for having me on. Yeah. And I've also so much appreciated you throughout the years and the work that you do with Teen Challenge and helping others. Man, you have literally changed the lives of thousands of people, and it's hard to tell how many people that they'll touch, that you'll have an impact on. So I just encourage you and Ashley and the family to keep running hard after him. And I appreciate you. I have a lot of respect for you and the work that you do. And you're just getting started, brother. I really believe that you're getting started.
We hear that. I tell people all the time, man, like I'm not, man, the only reason I'm here and where I'm at is because somebody told me a long time ago, God had a plan for my life. Yeah. And I've been foolish enough to believe it ever since, and I love it. That's really what it boils down to. And man, thank you guys for watching. I'm going to drop the links for Pastor Matt's contact, the church, everything in the description. Please, you got any feedback, any questions, don't hesitate to drop a comment, hit the like button, subscribe, all the fun YouTube stuff. And thank you guys for tuning in to Rebuilding Life After Addiction. If you need help also, Shenandoah Valley Teen Challenge, link is in the description. You can click the button down there and fill a form out, and we'll get back in touch with you and get you pointed in the right direction so you can get some help. God bless you guys.